Have you ever wondered how an ordinary adventure could turn into one of the most puzzling mysteries of the 21st century? Imagine heading out on a beautiful trail, surrounded by the lush greenery of a foreign land, only to vanish without a trace. This is the story of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, two young women whose journey to Panama began with excitement and dreams but ended in questions that have yet to find answers. In March 2014, Kris Kremers, 21 years old, and Lisanne Froon, 22, arrived in Panama with excitement in their hearts. They were students from the Netherlands, both bright with vibrant energy and big plans. They traveled to Bukit, a small town known for its stunning landscapes, rich rainforests, and the famous Pianista Trail. It was supposed to be a trip of exploration, volunteering, and learning. Kris was artistic, creative, and known for her adventurous spirit. Lisanne was a recent graduate, described as intelligent, athletic, and always up for a challenge. Together, they made the perfect team, a mix of spontaneity and cautious thought. Their journey was planned as a combination of leisure and community service. They had intentions to volunteer at a local school and immerse themselves in the culture. They wanted to help others, improve their Spanish, and see more of the world. Bukit seemed perfect, with its warm people, scenic views, and trails that promised breathtaking sights. But on April 1st, 2014, what started as a day of adventure on the Pianista Trail turned into a silence that grew with each passing hour. Kris and Lisanne set off in the early afternoon, likely chatting and taking in the vibrant sounds of nature. They had left with a sense of excitement that any traveler knows, the thrill of discovery. They wore casual clothes and carried only a few items: a backpack, a camera, some water, and their phones. The hike was expected to be brief, just a way to get familiar with the local trails. Hours turned into days, and as the sun set that evening, there was no sign of Kris or Lisanne. Friends, locals, and later their families began to wonder what happened to them. Did they get lost? Was there an accident? The Pianista Trail was known for being beautiful but could be tricky, especially for those unfamiliar with it. But Kris and Lisanne were cautious and smart. They were experienced hikers who knew how to take care of themselves. The initial silence brought worry, but soon it would turn into one of the most haunting searches in recent history. This is where the story begins, with two young friends, full of life, stepping into a trail that would soon become the center of countless searches, investigations, and endless speculation. This is their story, one marked by hope, mystery, and questions that refuse to be silenced. April 1st, 2014, started with a sense of exploration for Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. The day held the promise of a simple adventure, a hike through the famed Pianista Trail, a path that had become a favorite among both locals and visitors. It was known not just for its stunning views but also for the way it could challenge even the most experienced of hikers. The trail carved through dense forests, weaving up and down ridges that overlooked breathtaking landscapes, lush valleys, and mountains in the distance. As the morning sun rose high, casting golden light across the town of Bukit, Kris and Lisanne prepared themselves. They likely chatted over breakfast, packed a few essentials, water, their camera, their phones, and checked their gear. For anyone looking at them that morning, they would have seen two young friends filled with anticipation, eager to explore the beauty around them. They set out mid-morning, moving through the narrow streets of Bukit. Witnesses in town recalled seeing them pass by, walking side by side, their faces bright with smiles. They had an air of adventure about them that morning, blending in effortlessly with the other travelers and locals who frequented the town's lively markets and shops. The entrance to the Pianista Trail was not far from the heart of Bukit, an inviting gateway marked by a well-trodden path that disappeared into the greenery. It began as a clear and wide route, opening into a landscape filled with flowers and low brush. The early parts of the trail were dotted with wild blooms and birds that flitted through the sunbeams streaming through the canopy. As Kris and Lisanne stepped onto the trail, they were joined by the sounds of nature, the crunch of soil underfoot, the rustle of leaves overhead, and the distant call of birds. They were experienced hikers, accustomed to spending time outdoors, and it showed in their ease and steady pace. The laughter they shared and the photos they took reflected their comfort and enjoyment. The Pianista Trail had earned its reputation as both beautiful and unpredictable. While many completed the hike without incident, locals knew its hidden challenges. The first half of the trail was gentle and inviting, but as it continued, it shifted into a more rugged path, climbing into the hills. The vegetation thickened, and the ground became uneven. It was easy to lose the sense of direction in these parts, especially for those unfamiliar with the shifting landscape of the Panamanian jungle. Kris and Lisanne reached the midpoint of the trail by early afternoon, a spot known for its views over the valley. Here, the jungle opened to reveal a panorama that seemed to stretch for miles. Their camera captured them here, happy, taking in the breathtaking scenery. The photos would later reveal a timeline that seemed ordinary, snapshots of two friends on an adventure, each image holding a piece of the day's story. But the trail didn't end there. Beyond that scenic viewpoint, the path grew wilder. The markings were less clear, and it transitioned from a familiar hiking route into a dense thicket of tall trees and overgrown plants. It was a place where nature's control was absolute, where sounds deepened, and even light seemed to shift under the weight of the forest's canopy. There were few, if any, who saw them beyond this point. The last confirmed sightings of the young women in Bouquet placed them on their way to the trail, walking together, speaking animatedly. Locals who later came forward described them as carefree, enjoying the day like any other traveler, soaking in the beauty around them. As afternoon slipped into evening, the temperature dropped slightly, and the light began to shift from the bright hues of the day to the deeper shades of dusk. In the jungle, shadows grew longer and the sounds changed. The constant hum of insects replaced the morning bird songs, and the calls of distant animals created an unfamiliar symphony. The Pianista Trail had tricked hikers before. Some who ventured beyond its known path would recount the sense of direction slipping away as the trees closed in, paths split into unmarked forks, and the sheer density of the forest pressed down on any attempt to retrace steps. With no known witnesses to guide the narrative, speculation would become the only guide to what happened next. By nightfall, Kris and Lisanne's host family noticed their absence. At first, it might have been assumed that they were simply running late, perhaps caught up in the beauty of the trail or meeting other travelers. But as hours passed, concern grew. Calls went unanswered, and the silence stretched uncomfortably into the night. The last moments that day, documented only by the photos they had taken, would be the final breadcrumbs before their disappearance became the center of one of Panama's most unsettling mysteries. The vibrant, carefree afternoon on April 1, 2014, was now a memory that would linger as the final point of certainty in a story filled with what-ifs and unanswered questions. April 2, 2014, dawned with an air of quiet in the town of Bouquet. The morning sun broke over the hills, casting its light on the rooftops, the markets, and the narrow roads that connected the community. Life continued as usual. But for the host family who had welcomed Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon into their home, a gnawing sense of unease had settled in. The two young women had not returned the previous evening, and what began as mild concern turned into a palpable fear as the hours passed without word. At first, the possibility that they had merely stayed out late or taken an unplanned detour was discussed. Yet, as mid-morning arrived and there was still no sign of the pair, friends they had met, local acquaintances, and even casual neighbors began to voice their worries. The host family reached out to others in Bouquet, asking if anyone had seen Kris or Lisanne. Calls to their phones went unanswered, and the first real threads of urgency began to pull tight. By midday, word had spread beyond the immediate circle. The local police were informed, and search efforts were quietly initiated. These initial efforts were modest, an attempt to retrace the route they were known to have taken. Speaking to shopkeepers and guides familiar with the Pianista Trail, it was a well-traveled path, and there was hope that the girls had simply lost track of time and would appear soon, with tired feet and stories to tell. By the afternoon, the search efforts grew. Residents volunteered to join, forming small groups to comb the trail and surrounding areas. These were people who knew the land, farmers, guides, and hikers who understood the unique and sometimes unforgiving nature of the jungle. They called out the girls' names, their voices carrying through the dense trees, only to be met with silence. The first 24 hours of a missing persons case are critical, but in the rugged and expansive terrain of Bouquet, finding someone was never straightforward. The trail was known to deceive the senses. Paths split and narrowed, and once familiar sights would become foreign as the forest changed with the passing light. Searchers pressed on into the evening, flashlights casting long, uncertain beams through the underbrush, their calls swallowed by the deepening night. As night settled in again, the reality began to sink in. Kris and Lisanne were still missing. Their parents, thousands of miles away in the Netherlands, were contacted. For any parent, the news that their child was missing in a foreign country is an unspeakable blow. Calls were exchanged, voices breaking with worry, as the full weight of the situation took hold. Kris's parents, Hans and Rolly, and Lisanne's parents, Peter and Diney, prepared to make the journey to Panama, determined to be close to the search for their daughters. The following day, the search expanded. Official teams joined the volunteers, search and rescue workers, police, and even skilled trackers familiar with the forest's ways. The search now included aerial views, dogs trained to pick up scents, and careful mapping of where the girls might have wandered. They combed every recognizable path, looked under fallen logs, checked near streams, and pushed into thickets where movement was difficult and signs of life were scarce. Days turned into a week, and the uncertainty became overwhelming. The town of Boquete, once just a quaint stop on the map for travelers, was now marked by tension and hope stretched thin. Posters with Kris and Lisanne's faces appeared around town, in cafes and on notice boards. Searchers exchanged theories, and some spoke of places where they, too, had gotten disoriented or found themselves unexpectedly struggling in the jungle's embrace. Rumors started to circulate. Had they gone off the trail willingly? Were they injured and unable to signal for help? Each question came with its own weight, pulling at the resolve of those involved. Yet, despite the growing worry, the search continued. Helicopters scoured the forest from above, the hum of engines echoing across the hills. On the ground, local guides led search parties into hidden pockets of the forest, areas known only to those who had spent their lives tracing the trails of Panama. As the days stretched into weeks, the search took on a new dimension. The Dutch government became involved, supporting the efforts with resources and expertise. Teams with specialized equipment arrived to help with the increasingly complex mission. Kris and Lisanne's parents, now in Panama, were present at the search command center, speaking with authorities and volunteers, their eyes red from sleepless nights and raw emotion. The local community continued to rally around them, offering help in any way they could. Food for the searchers, translation assistance, and moral support for the families. The sense of solidarity was profound, but so was the growing realization that the jungle, vast and unyielding, held its secrets tightly. Each day without a trace felt heavier than the last, and the hopeful energy that had once driven the search began to ebb, replaced by an uneasy silence. The question that hung over everyone's head was simple, yet terrifying. How could two young women, experienced and cautious, vanish so completely in a place so full of life? For over 2 months, the lush, tangled jungle of Boquete seemed unwilling to share its secrets. Searchers had combed the trails, checked ravines, and pushed deeper into the dense vegetation than most had ever ventured. Yet, every step brought them closer to the edge of exhaustion and further from hope. The families of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, who had long since joined the search effort, were caught in a relentless cycle of waiting, hoping, and fearing the worst. Then, in June 2014, the silence was finally broken. Not by search parties or specialized equipment, but by a local woman living along the Culebra River. While going about her daily routine, she spotted something unusual lying on the riverbank, a blue backpack, partially buried in silt and twigs, as if the forest itself had tried to hide it. It was clean and remarkably dry, raising immediate questions about where it had been and how it had arrived there. Inside the backpack was a collection of items that spoke of 2 young women far from home, 2 pairs of sunglasses, $83 in cash, Lisanne's passport, a water bottle, and 2 brass neatly folded. But the most significant discoveries were Kris and Lisanne's phones and a digital camera. The items were dry, undamaged by the elements, which suggested that they had either been protected for weeks or that they had only recently been left there. Investigators and digital analysts turned their attention first to the phones, which they hoped would hold clues about the final days of Kris and Lisanne. Both women's phones, an iPhone belonging to Kris and a Samsung Galaxy belonging to Lisanne, revealed a series of attempted emergency calls starting just hours after they would have set out on their hike. The first emergency call was made on April 1st at 4:39 p.m. from Lisanne's phone, shortly after they would have realized they were lost or in trouble. The call did not connect due to the lack of cell reception deep in the jungle. Over the next several days, more attempts followed, each one a signal of growing desperation. The phones showed that on April 2nd, Kris's iPhone had attempted to call emergency services 3 times, while Lisanne's phone was used once. On April 3rd, there were no more calls, but the activity resumed on April 4th, suggesting that they were alive for at least that long. By April 5th, Lisanne's phone battery had been depleted, and no further attempts were made from it. Kris's phone, however, showed evidence of sporadic use until April 11th. One detail that stood out was an attempt to access the phone on that date using an incorrect PIN, implying that it was no longer Kris herself who was trying to use it. But the phones were only part of what was found in the backpack. The camera, a red Canon PowerShot, contained a series of photos that added to the enigma rather than providing answers. The early images were typical of any adventurous day: smiling selfies, views of the trail, and pictures capturing the breathtaking scenery of the surrounding mountains. These initial photos painted a picture of a carefree afternoon that belied the looming uncertainty. Then, the sequence shifted. Between April 8th and April 11th, a series of nighttime photos were taken, over 90 images, many of which were blurry and appeared to be of the dark jungle. A few photos captured strange, seemingly random subjects: a rock with a tuft of hair on top, the back of Lisanne's head, and what appeared to be sticks arranged on a rock. One particular image showed a trail marker or a stick with red plastic tied to it, as if it were meant to signify something, or perhaps serve as a signal. These photos led to heated debates among experts, internet sleuths, and investigators alike. What had driven them to take these photos? Were they trying to use the flash to signal rescuers, or were they trying to navigate through the dark? Did they take the pictures as a record of where they were, or did they suspect they were being followed and wanted to document their surroundings? As investigators pieced through this newfound evidence, more questions surfaced than answers. The fact that the backpack was dry and in good condition raised eyebrows. How could it have survived 2 months of rain and humidity without showing significant damage? Locals speculated that the backpack might have been placed there intentionally, perhaps by someone who had found it in another part of the jungle. The police considered the possibility that Kris and Lisanne had made it farther than originally thought, and that their remains or more clues might lie in even more remote parts of the forest. With the discovery of the backpack, hope and fear collided once more. The families, already worn thin by months of not knowing, were now facing a chilling realization. Their daughters had survived for days, struggling to find help or stay alive in a jungle that had swallowed them whole. The significance of the photos and phone logs were debated by experts. Some believed the photos were taken to scare away predators, while others thought they were simply attempts to illuminate the darkness. As the investigation pressed on, the forest yielded more fragments of the story. Not long after the discovery of the backpack, bone fragments were found near the Culebra River. A boot with a foot still inside and part of a pelvis belonging to Kris were identified. The bones were unusually clean and showed no signs of scratches or damage from animals. Some even suggested that certain bones appeared as if they had been bleached, a detail that stirred theories ranging from natural explanations to more sinister interpretations. These discoveries did not offer closure, only deepened the mystery. Where had Kris and Lisanne truly gone? And what had they faced during those days lost in the jungle? The contents of the backpack, the haunting night photos, and the phone logs were pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit neatly together. The forest, vast and uncaring, remained as enigmatic as ever, holding back the answers that so many sought. As the days and months passed, the search for Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon evolved from a physical hunt into an inquiry that spanned continents. The discovery of their backpack, camera, and the chilling phone logs left many stunned and confused. The items raised more questions than they answered, fueling a wave of speculation, theories, and debates among experts, investigators, and the public alike. How could two bright, resourceful young women simply vanish in a place that, while wild, was not unexplored? Was it truly the forest's fault, or was there something more to their story? The most widely accepted theory among local authorities was that Kris and Lisanne had simply succumbed to the treacherous nature of the Panamanian jungle. The El Pianista Trail, while popular, could be deceptive. Beyond its initial beauty, it led into dense, unmarked forest where trails disappeared, steep drops were masked by vines, and sudden rains could turn paths into mud-slicked traps. Experts pointed out that hikers unfamiliar with the area might not recognize the dangers until it was too late. The onset of disorientation could have occurred as the afternoon waned and daylight dwindled. With the phones showing repeated failed attempts to call for help, it was suggested that the girls had ventured into an area with no reception and unable to find their way back before nightfall became stranded. Nights in the jungle were notorious for plummeting temperatures, and without adequate supplies, hypothermia and exhaustion could set in quickly. Interviews with seasoned local guides recounted how even experienced trekkers had moments of panic when they miscalculated their routes or underestimated the distance back to safety. This theory was compelling, reinforced by the fact that the photos showed darkness and an apparent attempt to navigate in the dead of night. But while this explained part of the mystery, it didn't account for the strange, specific images taken with the camera or the condition of their remains. Another theory that gained traction suggested foul play. The sudden appearance of the intact backpack raised suspicions. How could it have remained dry and undamaged after 2 months in a rainforest known for its relentless rain and humidity? Some believed it had been placed there intentionally, a calculated act meant to lead searchers in a certain direction, or to give just enough information to keep the case ambiguous. There were stories, though unconfirmed, of criminal elements operating in the more remote parts of Boki and nearby areas. Did Kris and Lisanne encounter someone who posed a threat? Locals whispered about smugglers who sometimes used lesser-known trails to move goods. These suspicions, though chilling, were hard to prove without more concrete evidence. The absence of signs of a struggle, paired with the clean state of their bones and belongings, fed theories of an encounter that went beyond mere misfortune. Some forensic experts who examined the case noted that the bones, found at different distances, showed an odd level of decomposition. While tropical weather could expedite the natural decay process, the striking condition of certain bones led to speculation about external factors. The idea that some remains appeared bleached sparked controversial discussions about whether chemical involvement or other human interference was at play. The photos taken on the Canon PowerShot camera became the focus of deep analysis. Experts, amateur sleuths, and true crime enthusiasts dissected the images in online forums, hoping for a hidden clue that would explain why Kris and Lisanne captured those strange moments. Theories ranged from the pragmatic to the supernatural. Some argued the photos were an attempt to use the flash as a makeshift light source or signal to rescuers. Others posited that the images documented an attempt to create markers that could guide them back or alert others to their location. The more unsettling interpretations suggested that some photos were taken under duress. Why was one photo a blurry image of Lisanne's hair? Was it an accident, or did someone else take it? And what of the images that seemed to show darkness with little discernible detail? While most experts leaned toward practical explanations, such as attempts to find a way in the dark or a desperate bid to ward off predators, the lack of definitive answers left room for darker theories. Interviews with Kris's and Lisanne's families brought forward the personal side of the mystery. They spoke about the girls' strong characters, their resourcefulness, and their sense of responsibility. These were not two individuals likely to take reckless risks. The families shared insights into Kris and Lisanne's meticulous planning and preparedness, underscoring the strangeness of their disappearance. The parents were vocal about their belief that more could have been done in the crucial early days of the search. Their statements carried a weight that resonated not just as a call for answers, but as a reminder of the deep pain left by so many unresolved questions. Local media in Panama covered the story extensively, adding layers of speculation and sometimes contributing to the confusion with conflicting reports. International outlets picked up on the case, sparking global interest that reached audiences far beyond Boki. Theories about criminal involvement and cover-ups found fertile ground, and debates raged over whether the investigation had missed key evidence or failed to pursue critical leads. In the midst of all the expert analysis, there were theories veered into the realm of the supernatural and the local folklore that surrounded the Panamanian wilderness. The region's indigenous stories spoke of spirits that guarded the forest, leading those who trespassed too far astray. Although these stories were often dismissed as cultural myths, some believed there was an element of truth woven into them. Did Kris and Lisanne venture into a part of the forest that was sacred or known for being dangerous for reasons beyond the natural? While these explanations were the most abstract, they captivated the imaginations of many who followed the case. There were also more grounded yet speculative ideas. What if the nighttime photos were an attempt to scare off an animal, or were they signaling someone unseen? Theories involving disorientation due to the intense, echoing sounds of the forest at night gained attention. The jungle, when enveloped in darkness, was alive in a way that many could only imagine, a sensory overload of noises, movements, and a deep, pressing sense of isolation. The global fascination with Kris and Lisanne's case led to a surge of armchair detectives, documentaries, and online discussions. Each theory, whether based in fact or speculation, kept the case in the spotlight but often blurred the lines between truth and conjecture. Media coverage highlighted the painstaking process of piecing together the timeline and analyzing evidence, but it also showcased the emotional toll on the families. In the end, every theory shared one common element: the desire to know what really happened. Was it simply a tragic accident amplified by nature's merciless hand, or did unseen forces, whether human or otherwise, play a part in the young women's disappearance? The answers remained elusive, tangled in the very heart of the jungle that had swallowed 2 lives and left the world searching for reasons. June 2014 marked a turning point in the search for Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. It had been months since their disappearance, and hope was fading. The discovery of their backpack had reignited the search efforts, but the jungle remained silent, as if guarding its secrets tightly. However, not long after the backpack surfaced, the forest yielded something far more chilling: skeletal remains. The initial find came when search parties, retracing known and unknown routes along the Kulobra River, discovered a single bone, a part of a foot, still encased in a boot. This discovery set off a wave of forensic analysis as experts carefully examined the remains. The boot and the foot were found to belong to Lisanne. It was a moment that confirmed what everyone feared: the young women had met a tragic end. The scene was marked by silence, a profound stillness that fell over the searchers as they processed the weight of the find. The discovery did not end there. Over the next few days, more bone fragments were found scattered in various locations along the river, some quite a distance from where the backpack had been recovered. Among them was part of a pelvis, later identified as belonging to Kris, and a rib bone. The sites where the bones were discovered were not clustered together, but spread across an area that suggested movement, perhaps by water or animals, or something else altogether. This separation raised new questions. Had the bodies been carried by the river's current? Did wildlife play a role in scattering the remains, or had someone intentionally moved them? Forensic experts from Panama, as well as specialists brought in from the Netherlands, began to study the condition of the bones. This was no simple task. The Panamanian jungle, with its high humidity, intense heat, and voracious wildlife, is known to accelerate decomposition. Yet, what they found added a layer of complexity that few could have anticipated. Some of the bones were stark white, almost pristine, as if exposed to the sun or some sort of bleaching agent. This finding baffled the experts. Natural processes in the jungle, even under extreme conditions, do not usually produce such results. Forensic anthropologists debated the possibilities. Could mineral deposits in the river water cause such a bleaching effect, or had someone tried to hide the evidence by artificially treating the bones? The theories varied, each adding to the cloud of mystery surrounding the girl's disappearance. Other bones showed signs consistent with natural decomposition, hinting at exposure to the elements over time. This inconsistency between the conditions of the remains fueled further theories. Could it be that part of the evidence had been tampered with, while the rest had simply succumbed to the jungle's natural processes? The police and forensic teams could not provide definitive answers, but the implications were unsettling. The skeletal remains told only part of the story. Without tissue or further evidence, the cause of death could not be determined definitively. Pathologists noted that the lack of trauma marks on the bones suggested no apparent violence. Yet this did not exclude more subtle possibilities, such as injuries that may not have left marks on the bones. Drowning, starvation, or hypothermia were all plausible explanations, but without more context, it was impossible to say for certain. As more remains were discovered, each find brought with it more speculation. The distance between the bones was a puzzle in itself. Some experts argued that seasonal changes in the river could have scattered the remains, while others pointed out that only specific bones were found, with no sign of clothing or larger bone structures. This selective discovery pattern hinted at either very specific environmental conditions or, as some suspected, human intervention. The families of Kris and Lisanne, who had endured months of anguish, faced the grim confirmation that their daughters would not return. They worked with Dutch and Panamanian authorities to ensure that every lead was explored and every piece of evidence analyzed. Their grief was public, raw, and deeply moving. They spoke of their daughters' bright spirits, the love for life that had brought them to Panama in the first place. Yet behind each statement was the hope for more answers and, above all, accountability for what had happened. The local community, which had watched the mystery unfold, shared the family's pain. The discovery of remains created a somber atmosphere in Baki. Townspeople who had once been involved in the search reflected on what more could have been done. Conversations turned to local guides, myths of the jungle, and stories of travelers who ventured too far into its green maze and never returned. Yet, for many, the discovery of the bones reinforced the idea that something more complicated than an accidental misadventure had taken place. The discoveries fueled public debates and media coverage that scrutinized every detail of the case. Documentaries were made, interviews conducted, and theories laid out in painstaking detail. What was it that kept this story alive in the minds of so many? Was it the allure of an unsolved mystery, or the relatable fear of being lost and alone in an unforgiving place? The story of Kris and Lisanne became more than a case. It was a symbol of how even the most carefully planned adventures could descend into tragedy. leaving a trail of questions that no one could fully answer. The story of the skeletal remains, like the earlier discoveries of the backpack and the haunting camera photos, was a piece of a larger, fragmented puzzle. Each bone told a story of time spent in a place that was beautiful, wild, and indifferent to human life. For the families, the only solace was knowing that they had left no stone unturned, even if the jungle withheld its ultimate secrets. The story of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon remains, to this day, an enigma carved into the memory of all who followed their journey. The discoveries along the Kulber River and the details extracted from the girls' phones and camera provided fragments of understanding, but they never pieced together a complete picture. Instead, they left a legacy of unanswered questions that have haunted investigators, families, and the public alike. The most pressing question that lingers is, what really happened on that fateful day? Theories abound, yet each one falls short of providing the full truth. If it was an accident, why were only specific bones found in such peculiar condition? Why did the camera contain such cryptic nighttime photos? And who, if anyone, was trying to access Kris's phone days after the last known call attempt? These questions evoke a sense of deep discomfort, as if the forest itself were complicit in keeping its secrets. The legacy of this case extends beyond the mystery itself. For the families of Kris and Lisanne, the search for answers became a battle against silence and time. Hans and Roly Kremers, along with Peter and Diney Froon, became symbols of resilience and the profound love that fuels parents' determination. Their voices pushed the case into the international spotlight, where it would find a following among those who couldn't let the mystery go. They attended press conferences, spoke to media outlets, and urged the world to remember their daughters not just as victims of a tragedy, but as vibrant young women whose lives were full. The impact of the case was not confined to the families alone. It rippled out to touch the town of Boquete, altering its perception from a quiet, idyllic destination to a place shadowed by uncertainty. Tourism in the region saw fluctuations as the stories spread, drawing a mix of adventurers intrigued by the mystery and those deterred by the potential dangers. Local guides and businesses were forced to confront questions about safety, accountability, and how such a disappearance could happen without resolution. Some sought to reassure visitors with stories of past safe experiences, while others shared warnings of the jungle's unpredictable nature. For many who live and work near the Pianista Trail, the story of Kris and Lisanne became a reminder of how easily beauty and danger intertwine. Veteran guides spoke of their encounters with tourists who underestimated the wildness of the terrain, and locals told tales of past incidents where people had wandered too far or misunderstood the shifting trails. Even those who knew the paths well admitted that the forest was a place with its own rules, where the line between being found and being lost was thinner than most would believe. The case also had an unexpected effect on the wider world. The story captured the attention of internet sleuths, amateur detectives, and true crime enthusiasts. Online forums buzzed with activity, filled with discussions that dissected every piece of available evidence. Photos were analyzed down to the smallest pixel, maps were redrawn to hypothesize different routes the girls might have taken, and theories were argued with a fervor usually reserved for only the most captivating mysteries. The power of the internet became both an ally and a source of frustration. While some dedicated individuals uncovered details or shared insights that added depth to the conversation, others contributed noise and unsubstantiated claims that muddied the waters. This digital interest led to an unprecedented level of attention on cases involving young travelers and remote exploration. Blogs, podcasts, and documentaries emerged, each retelling the story with their own spin, feeding the public's hunger for resolution while emphasizing just how elusive real answers can be. Some productions focused on the human element, the hope, the heartbreak, the relentless pursuit of understanding by the families. Others took a more analytical approach, questioning the findings, revisiting the physical evidence, and probing the official reports for inconsistencies or missed details. But beyond the theories and speculations, there was a deeper, universal lesson that resonated. The human desire for answers is both a strength and a burden. For every piece of evidence that was found, there remained a shadow of uncertainty. For every theory that seemed plausible, there was a counterpoint that raised doubt. The search for Kris and Lisanne, though focused on a specific place and time, became emblematic of the broader human experience. How we seek meaning in chaos, clarity in confusion, and closure in the face of the unknowable. Yet their legacy is not only one of questions but also of lessons learned. Adventurers and travelers who heard their story began to approach their own explorations with more caution and respect for the environments they entered. Hiking groups and travel organizations updated their guidelines, emphasizing preparation, communication and the importance of local knowledge. The tragedy underscored the necessity of better infrastructure for search and rescue operations in remote areas, leading to incremental improvements in safety measures and awareness campaigns. As time passed, the families of Kris and Lisanne continued to honor their daughter's memories by supporting initiatives that promoted safe travel and awareness. Memorials were held, both in the Netherlands and in Boki, bringing people together in remembrance. Though the case remained unresolved, the impact of their story inspired discussions about safety, resilience, and the many ways the world can come together in the face of mystery and loss. The story of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon is a haunting chapter in the history of adventure, a reminder that even with all the planning, all the precautions, life can take unforeseen turns. It asks us to remember that each search for answers is a journey in itself, one marked by persistence, community, and sometimes acceptance of the mysteries that remain.